an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Dandelion Dynasty, Book 3, Chapters 18 and 19, The Veiled Throne, and Spies. In this episode, Gia keeps saying that Phyro isn't ready to sit the throne. I thought she was being power hungry, but it looks like she's correct. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. What's up, Kyle, if you're out there? Okay, so I'm going to get to that, but I will register my surprise at how correct Gia turned out to be. I don't like Gia. I'm going to just put that out on the table. There are parts of her that I admire. She's extremely intelligent in many ways. But I don't like her. So, naturally, she's trying to keep this kid off the throne, and I am gonna think the worst of her. Because I don't like her. And that's a mistake. I am aware that this is a way that a lot of us work as people, so I try to keep it under control. But we just have a tendency to, if we don't like someone for kind of silly, petty reasons sometimes, we will assume the worst of them on a grander scale. And granted, sometimes that's legit. But it's not always right. And it's a dangerous precedent to get into, that you only believe in people that you personally like. And I try so hard to be aware of that. But fictional characters, it's gonna be a thing where I just indulge myself a little bit more. You know, just gonna let myself not like her and think the worst of her. Didn't work out for me this time. So let's start with Chapter 18, The Veiled Throne. The grand audience hall was deserted. And here we get a really detailed description of the grand audience hall's setup, some of the changes that have been made, and just overall, the sort of energy that it feels like this room has. She does not hold court here often at all, because she finds it really tedious and overly formal. So she prefers to meet in the little, sort of council room. And we get some details about Phyro and his relationship to this throne. Empress Gia asked the boy to sit upon the throne, but with a silk veil surrounding it like the mosquito netting drawn around the beds of the wealthy merchants in Wolf's Paw. And she says, because you are here to listen and learn. If the ministers and generals could see your reactions during the debate, they would craft their arguments to persuade you. Instead, they should be attempting to persuade one another and me. Now, this is something that Kuni was doing, right? He wore that headdress with the cowrie shell veil in front of his face so that they couldn't tell what his expressions were in response to whatever was being said. This is the kind of thing that I find really fascinating, because I could see certain cultures being hiding your face because you can't be in total command of your expression is weakness. You know, you needing to do that in order to ensure that you don't give yourself away, you aren't great at the job then. However, I would argue that doing this instead, it is really smart, because you don't have to be schooled at your face. I mean, even if you speak, they could tell probably from your tone of voice without seeing your face certain things. But it's just a sort of like flat playing field that whether or not you're very good at that sort of self-control, it won't actually matter to your success in keeping your face hidden. And in this frame of mind, I kind of agree with Gia, because Gia's whole thesis, right, is that having just and good people in place is not a way to leave a legacy. You can't rely on individuals with good judgment to stand in for a system, because individuals with good judgment are inevitably going to die and need to be replaced, and may not be replaced with people who are equally as good at the job. So what you want in place is a system that is designed to function whether or not a certain type of personality is in charge. In other words, take people's personal opinions out of the equation entirely and make it all about the function of the system. This is the kind of thing that sounds good on paper. And I really do understand her thinking on this. You know, that's why I'm saying this sort of veil, you don't have to be good at keeping your face in check, and it's still effective. Yes. However, this is a one-step option. This is not setting in place an entire system, which, as we know, can be really taken advantage of and twisted. And we know, like, just in the United States, with the way that amendments have been twisted, and, you know, like, everything has interpretations. So trying to make a system that is beyond interpretation, while admirable, also feels deeply inflexible. And there's drawbacks to both, frankly. You know, I understand feeling like her idea is more, it's destined for longer term success. That more times out of, let's say, a handful of decisions, Gia's system will probably come to a better judgment than a handful of 5 different people judging the same case. However, systems are also difficult because they can just completely cut out people of let's say, a population that hasn't been considered. You know, if you make a law that everybody has to function in this certain way, and there's nobody there to tell you, maybe, you're not considering the disabled or people who don't have parents to care for them or whatever. If there's nobody to consider them, your system has been put in place with a giant blind spot. And Gia, I'm sure, would just respond with, when we get notice that there is a blind spot, we repair the blind spot. But once a system's in place, changing it to accommodate a new segment is so difficult. So I don't know. I really, really understand her perspective in some ways, but also as somebody who grew up in a country based on alleged systems that are just completely exploited and reconstructed to be exploited more efficiently, it's really difficult for me to take that seriously. It's like, I know it can be done because there are other countries that function with systems and people are actually being taken care of via those systems. So I don't think it's impossible, but being as with everything that's been happening in the United States the past 10 years, I have a kind of fatalistic perspective about this sort of thing right now. And I need to hear more about the overall, tone she wants to take with some of the systems. I will say her decision regarding what happens in this chapter and what Phyro is asking, which ultimately turns into a whole thing with Kogo Yelu, that decision is compassionate and I think speaks well of what she's trying to achieve overall. But I have my reservations, and it's just going to take a while for her to win me over with this. So, okay. Every birthday, Phyro petitioned for the regency to be terminated and the veil around the throne removed. Always, Gia's answer was the same. Your father instructed my regency to continue until the heir is ready to take the reins of power. You are not ready. And again, I assumed the worst of her here, and I also thought, like, I was sort of stopping and going, wow, Kuni, I feel like you didn't really think that through. Just saying when he's ready is such a vague and subjective measure. And you could have just said a certain age or something like this so that he would automatically be put in power. And what's kind of funny is when you step back and look at it, an age might be something that Gia would want to set in place because of systems. But Kuni's is a lot more subjective and dependent on the person he assigns the task. And Gia sure has no problem obeying the letter of his word when it's about her subjectivity and her interpretation of whether he's ready or not. And, you know, like, I'm not going to blame her for taking advantage of the words being something that you can toy with. We're all doing that. You know, we all are going to try and get the most out of whatever opportunities we have put in front of us. But it is kind of funny to see, like, how quickly she'll be like, no, but I'm going to decide personally, and that's going to be how this is run. So Phyro asked for the audience hall to be rearranged so the sovereign again sat facing north, as had been the custom in the time of Emperor Ragin, the direction of unredeemed Dara and the Liuku conquerors, instead of facing south, a change instituted by Empress Gia. We must never dismiss from mind the goal of rescuing the people of Dasu and Rui, suffering and dying under Liuku predation. There must be a reminder so we don't forget to avenge my father who died without setting Dara free. Empress Gia refused. War must never be the chief aim of a wise sovereign. She had literally turned her back on unredeemed Dara. The next day, Phyro took his honor guard and left Pan. He went to Tirokozo, a secluded hamlet in the Wisoti Mountains, where the young Garinafins, hatched from eggs brought by Takval, were being raised. So, yeah, I mean, again, no, his aim as an emperor shouldn't be war. And she's like 100% right. But it doesn't feel like, to me, it doesn't feel like we see or hear a lot about anyone trying to genuinely sit down with him and talk about why that's true. And the thing is, this is all me saying we need to sit down and explain this to him. I'm not assuming that it's going to work. Okay, I admit, I love to imagine that reasoned discussion is going to be what gets through to people, and unfortunately, historically, that has rarely proven true. However, there are ways, if you have the power and the means, to really get through to somebody the effects of a decision that they're about to make. And I feel if they had, like, really led him through some of the places that had been completely destroyed, and if he had gotten to hear some of the stories of the suffering at the hands of maybe their own troops at times, he might begin to comprehend the overall price he is talking about trying to pay. Because the vibe I get for Phyro, it's not to say that he hasn't been in battle, but it's different when you are the fucking emperor or son of the emperor, what you're going to be exposed to. And I am not entirely certain that he really has ever been exposed to, like, the consequences at large on a grander scale without things being sort of muted because, you know, oh, he's coming through, so we're going to make this all look better for him because he's a big shot. I'm curious about that, you know? So he goes into this audience room, this, like, council chamber, and she knows that he's here, but he hasn't come to greet her before, like, just barging in, and it's a very strategic thing, and he thinks that it's a really smart move. The fact that she already knows he's here, I don't feel like there's any particular advantage to this. And when he comes in, Tankaru Kono is so happy to see him, and is just like, God damn, you look like your father. And this is something that is so cliche, but I have to imagine my friends who are having children, I'm going to have the same reaction, because there is an ineffable quality that people have that make them distinctly who they are. And when you see that handed down and it's like so hard to put your finger on what it even is, that's kind of all you can say. You look like your father. Oh my God, you remind me of your mother. Things like that are just going to happen. And I'm not saying them yet. I know I shall. And Gia sort of interrupts this and is like, guys, I understand that you haven't seen each other in a while, but you're going to have to do this later. We have shit to do. So it turns out that the Garinnafins they have acquired are a secret. Only a very few people know about them. And I had been wondering what was going on with Thera and like how much the people knew. And it turns out everybody assumes that she's dead, and they're like kind of encouraging that narrative. A Ryukyu City ship sent by Tanvanaki to welcome the reinforcements had witnessed the sinking of Dara ships under the assault of a lone Garinnafin. The ability of Dissolver of Sorrows and her sister ships to dive underwater was kept from the public, and Empress Gia made the decision to allow most in Dara proper and unredeemed Dara to believe that the princess was dead. The thought was, if Tanvanaki and the Ryukyu invaders felt threatened by the Dara-Aegon alliance, they might use Thera's voyage as an excuse to break the peace treaty and attack. With the Dara fleet destroyed by the wall, of course, the alliance was assumed to be void as well. And so, a state funeral had been held for Thera, who was posthumously granted the title of Grand Princess. A set of her court regalia was buried in an empty tomb in the Imperial Cemetery next to the empty grave of Emperor Ragen, whose body also had never been recovered. This is one of those things that fascinates me, is the concept of a grave being made for you because people don't realize you're still alive, and how absolutely trippy it must be to like come back and see it. This is a trope in a lot of things, you know, faking your own death or being assumed dead mistakenly is a bit in a lot of stories. And every time that this comes up, I just imagine how I probably would be kind of mad if I saw my gravestone. Like, I'd be like, this is what you picked? I just can't imagine being satisfied, because seeing how you're represented after your death is always going to feel kind of inadequate, you know? Like, yeah, but I mean, that's all well and good, but like, I'm still dead. This sucks. So anyway, they are talking about refugees here, and the thrust of this, and I'll get to like the overall thing with refugees in a second, but there is a particular man who fell in love with a Dara woman, and he genuinely fell in love with her. This isn't like I fucked her and kept her as like a salt wife, you know. This is, I married her properly in a way that's not really supposed to be allowed by the Ryukyu, and as soon as I did that, they pretty much lost all respect for me. And this guy, rather than set his wife aside and try and take it back, is like, you know what? Fuck these assholes. And he gets a bunch of people together who also want to flee, and his wife, and they bail, and they actually make it away. And it's an interesting thing that I think Phyro says later, that probably this guy took advantage of being a Ryukyu and knowing some of like the ways in which they would have been detected, because there are perimeter guards trying to keep people from fleeing, that probably he used some of that in order to get out. Gia is much more suspicious of this guy and basically thinks that he is being set up as a spy, but I guess what she's thinking is that he'll come with them, find out about their defenses, and then sneak away and tell. But the thing is, like, usually spies are people from Dara who have been turned because they can fit in a lot more easily. And this guy being straight up Liuku and not lying about being Liuku this is kind of not the way it usually works. And Phyro describes the meeting he had with this guy. And when they said, well, maybe you can give us some information about y'all's fleets, this dude pulls a knife and holds it to his own throat. And Gia starts to go down the whole, like, oh, that was a impardonable, fuck up of security. And Phyro interrupts and is like, that is not the point. The point is, if he had wanted to kill me, he had a weapon on him to try and do it. And he didn't even make a move until it was his own life that he was going to put in danger. So obviously, killing me, which would have been the fucking move, is not what he wants. It's just that he doesn't want to completely turn on his own people. He has a line he won't cross. And I think this is fascinating because we all, I think, there is just a snitches get stitches attitude, like, amongst the general populace. And while I believe most of us are more likely to be snitches than we like to admit, it's still something that's, like, really looked down on. However, you also are not going to want to turn away an advantage like this. So if you're a writer and you're trying to write somebody who defects but still keeps the respect of whomever it is he's speaking to and also the readers, how do you do that? And I think this is the answer. You give the guy a different kind of code. It's not that he won't work with the enemy against his own people. He will. But he is going to have very specific parameters about what that looks like. And basically, Phyro's thinking is that this guy just wants to level the playing field. Because the Liuku with their Garrinafins are just so OP that this guy is thinking, if there's something else I can do to help you guys, I will. Because otherwise, I'm sorry, there's no way you can win. And that's not to say this guy knows about the Garrinafins, because I don't know how much about that they have told him. I hope none. But their thinking is that this guy has worked with Garrinafins before. He rode them. He knows. And nobody from Dara knows how to handle these fucking things. So they have these eggs that they're, like, trying to hatch. And they're raising young. And they're just kind of hoping for the best. And trying to use, like, the science from the dissections of bodies and stuff to inform how they need to do things. But they don't have anyone who's already got information about, like, what kind of things spook them, what kind of things anger them, what kind of treatment will they tolerate, and what is, like, absolutely not okay. How do you communicate in a way that, like, we know the Liuku have those horns that they press against this, like, area of their skull so that they can speak into it. That's not something the Dara are probably just going to come up with. I don't know how, maybe they've seen them doing it and they're trying things, but it's all still going to be, it's just starting from scratch, essentially. So this guy would be a huge advantage. And Phyro, because this is a martial advantage, is all about it. And Gia thinks, first of all, that this guy is probably a lying spy. But second of all, even if he is telling you the truth and he wants to help, you're still focusing on going to war. We have 2 years of a peace treaty left. Why are you focusing on this? I understand that it's important as a defensive measure, but that's not how you're thinking of it, and everybody knows that. And if you were actually attempting to understand ruling, then this would fall a lot farther down your list. And she's not wrong. So then comes this sort of interesting thing where he puts this forward. All of the counselors get to say how they feel. And none of them side with him. except for Zomi. And as we find later, Zomi has been asked by Thera to help him. But also, Kogoyelu is doing that thing, and I'd forgotten that he was written like this, but he is somebody who couches everything he says in this, like, false humility and whatnot. And what he says is very interesting. So he immediately starts off saying, I'm just curious because I know that we've had these detention centers for the refugees for a while. And there are kids there that are like half Dara. What are we doing about that? And everybody's sort of flat-footed because they're like, what does this have to do with what we're talking about? But Gia responds, and basically, what's going on here? Zomi set up these detention centers for people who were fleeing from the Liuku, and there were precious few that managed to actually make it across. And they arrive on rafts, and they are given a place to stay, and I make that sound as soft as possible because it doesn't sound like much, and questioned to ensure that they are not spies or that they don't have ill feelings toward Dara or any number of issues that somebody could bring with them into their city. But the problem is, Zomi never really established a system for getting them out again, even though enough time has passed for many of these people who are stuck here for it to be perfectly clear they're not a threat and they're not up to anything. And yet, it sort of feels like, well, what do we just let them go? And I feel like, yeah, I mean, you could. But Zomi, it seems like, because she hadn't actually put anything in place, wasn't sure how to handle it or how to bring it up. So Kogoyelu is asking this because it's a genuine question. Like, they have an issue, the Liuku, with kids that are half Dara, half Liuku. They don't like them and think that they're abominations or unclean or whatever. But that's a kind of superiority that we shouldn't subscribe to. We should welcome these kids as full-blooded citizens. It doesn't matter. And because they are trying to separate themselves from the way Liuku does things, Gia agrees and is like, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And then essentially, because she has agreed with Kogo in front of everybody on this point, he can press his advantage overall, because otherwise she'd have to sort of take back part of what she said, which makes her look weak and like she doesn't fully think things through before she says them. So he then puts forth, well, if the kids are full-blooded citizens, then that means the parents really have to be like, otherwise we're saying we're going to part kids from their parents, and that's like a fucked up thing. We're not doing that. Can I tell you guys how much Jim from The Office stared at the camera in my head? I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about what's going on with the United States and immigration and the situation here, because frankly, I am not current enough with my information to make declarations that I feel comfortable with in a political sense. But in a morality sense, in a human rights sense, the United States has fucking turned its back on everything it is allegedly supposed to stand for so publicly for so many years, and is outright abusing the refugees that are turning up at our border, and it's known that they are. And so far as I have heard, not a lot is being done about that. And I don't know how many of you heard about like some of the real atrocities, especially against women and young girls, but it's sick. It's sick. And parting parents from kids is like our favorite. We are big fans. It's a whole thing. So to see this like council entirely agree that the concept of letting the kid be a citizen, but like forcing a separation from them, between them and their parents, is completely out of the question. It just gave me this like profound sense of longing for a government that actually even pretends to care. Because we just don't even have the pretense anymore. And that's not to say I want to go back to a pretense with no action. But when nobody's even pretending anymore, that's when you can't even give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, the pretense, you feel some sense of like, they're probably not being honest about this, but I think that if they're put on the spot, they'll have to do X, Y, Z, because how can they not in the public eye? And there's almost a sense of like enough shame will force them onto the right side of things, because we're all at least trying to reach this bare minimum of decency in order to be reelected. And now we don't even have that. The bare minimum of decency is so wildly out of whack that they don't even have to promise that anymore, and they'll still get elected. And so what I'm saying is like the pretense isn't what I want, but the pretense had a kind of power to it. And here, it's not even really pretense. I mean, sure, some of them are agreeing just because they see Gia beginning to agree, but like, nevertheless, everybody's pretty much united in like, oh yeah, well, we're not doing that. Because it's just low-key unthinkable to try something else. I wish so hard, y'all. I really do. It's just, like, beyond a political scope. It is so discouraging to feel like what is right just doesn't matter anymore. And like, if it ever did, but yikes. So anyway, Kogo brings this up. And then he's like, and that means that, you know, if the parents are free, then they can go where they will. They can set up in other places and become citizens and exercise their rights. That said, if we have established that, we should like keep this guy under observation for a little while and see further how he looks at the situation and whether or not he's proven to be a spy. And the detail that I overlooked, but Gia did not because she's good, is that this guy's wife is pregnant. So what Kogo is suggesting is we're going to establish this law that the children and the parents of those children who are half Dara are full citizens and have the rights to leave. And then this guy that you're waffling about is just going to chill until he has a kid and can take advantage of that benefit and go where he wants. And Gia is just like, oh, so is that what you're doing? And of course, she has to change it into, okay, we're going to like vet him further and then let him do what needs doing, because she has to maintain control over this guy's particular situation. She can't let Kogo win via this weird sort of like default system. And that's the thing, isn't it, Gia? You want this system in place for things, but then when somebody is trying to use it a certain way, you feel a way about that, and that's how it's going to work. But you're not ready for that conversation. So the thing that's really the most interesting for me here is there's two. One is that Zomi is the one who is thinking about how clever Kogo is here, and that she still, first of all, has a lot to learn from him as she's watching him do this sort of masterful cornering of Gia in front of everybody in a way that can't really be, he can't be condemned for it. I mean, Gia acknowledges it within the conversation, and they are mostly aware, the others, of what has been done here. But because Kogo is so slippery with it. It's too late. You can acknowledge it all you want, but that shit's done. So, and Zomi is like, honestly, thanks, Kogo, because I didn't set up a second half of my plan, and it was starting to look bad for me. And you just came in here and did a whole thing and got me out of my own mess. Wow. Thanks. You really handled this shit. But Phyro, my second point is Phyro. He doesn't get it. And this is what makes Zomi watch him and go, shit, he really isn't ready. He's bored by everything that Kogoyelu has been saying. He is not at all putting two and two together about what the conclusions that he's drawing, what those ultimately mean for the man that Phyro is talking about. He doesn't understand the statecraft at large is affecting your tiny specific situation, so pay attention. He sees it as just like basically somebody reading aloud the spreadsheet from like an accountant, and he's not doing the math to realize that these numbers are genuinely significant. Don't tune them out. So when all is said and done and Gia agrees to let this guy go with Phyro, Phyro only acknowledges Zomi and thanks her, like with his eyes and a little nod, because he doesn't get that it was Kogo who managed it all. And he actually treats Kogo with like a kind of disgust, which this is exactly what his sister winds up pointing out to him later. He's leaving. He runs into her in the gardens. And she is like, dude, you're leaving already? And he's like, yeah, I got what I came for. I'm taking off. I'm going to do my thing. And she's like, you aren't even going to sit with like Aunt Mother and I and have dinner? Just dinner before you go? And he says how he can't stand to do it. And basically, she says, see, this is why you're no good at this. She really kind of gets in his face with it. And it's remarkable to me how direct she's being. And yet it doesn't sink in for him in a way that feels genuine. There is a moment eventually where he has to stop and go, I realize that you have grown and I'm underestimating you. But it takes so long for him to get there. And the way he says it, there is no indication that he really hears Farah's words and what they mean. What it feels like is him realizing that Farah can make an argument at all, and that she is like citing quotations and things in a way that feels learned, and is impressive on its surface. And that's what he's complimenting her on. But the logic, he's not even paying attention to it. And basically what she's saying is, you are giving the impression that you are single-minded in what you want. You are not paying any attention to the rumors circulating about deposing you, basically. And he's like, I'm not paying attention to this like gossip bullshit. And she rightly is like, oh my God, dude, even Father said how important political theater was. That's the whole thing. You create a story with everything you do, and that story gets told and retold and retold until it's the truth. So you know that he believes in that. And he was like a legend. Why aren't you processing that this is important? And he's like, because I'm still the emperor. Anything that Gia tries to do to depose me, I have the fucking army. What is she even going to do? And here's the thing. This is the exact... Phyro thinks that the army is loyal to him specifically. Because he's the emperor, he believes that by default, there is no way that can be taken from him. Because that's not how it's supposed to work. And I think everybody who has lived through the 2016 presidential election and the years after has begun to realize taking it for granted that things work the way they do because of custom, because that's always how it has worked, is a death sentence. It's just a mistake. If things aren't written into law in a system, I give you this one, Gia, that you have to do them this way, then people who have done it that way simply because it's, quote, how it's done, once they reach a point where that doesn't benefit them anymore, why would they keep doing that? It's just a custom. It's just a tradition. So he really seems to believe that if something were to happen and he gets deposed and he has the army with him, the army will straight up be like, we follow you. You are the emperor. We would never. I don't really have a good idea how he's looked at by his army in terms of like their personal respect and loyalty to him, whether or not he is shown to be a smart leader that they genuinely have admiration for. I don't have a good sense of that. So I'm not saying he's wrong about it, but I am saying it is not something to bet on. And the concept of this thing, basically, this seat being taken from him, Farah tells him that somebody floated like an essay about the possibility of him not being emperor anymore. And he is like, yeah, and nobody responded to it because nobody's taking it seriously. And she said, nobody responded to it is the exact fucking problem. If anybody had tried this when Dad was sitting the throne, are you kidding? They'd have been torn the fuck apart for that. But this, not a word. Nobody pushed back on it. They're testing the waters because they're thinking seriously about doing this. And he will not hear it. He just won't. He just really doesn't think, if he has the army, that there's anything to worry about. And I'm not excited about him maybe finding out it's not how it works. And even if it is how it works, only being emperor because you have the army means that you are going to be willing to take down people who previously worked for you and create a bloodbath in your own country to hold on to power. And Farah, when he essentially says that he will, she's really horrified and tells him, like, don't say that. Oh my God, tell me you didn't just say that. And he doesn't seem to get why what he said is so troubling. And it's truly, he just doesn't seem to really understand what he's saying and what that would turn him into. He's out here quoting like Mata Zindu. And granted, the story he uses as an example in this chapter, it's about like being honorable to a fault. So it's hard to say, oh yeah, that's like not why, how are you going to fault the kid for admiring that in somebody? But Kuni won and got where he is because he wasn't. Low key, that's just a fact. Kuni shook his hands and said that, yeah, this is a complete truce. And then he pulled some shit. And Phyro just doesn't want to look at it, man. He doesn't want to. And I don't blame him. Nobody wants to like think about that part of what your family did, you know? But it's come to a point where it's for his own survival that he should be paying attention, and he isn't. And Soto comes out and tries to talk to him. And it's clear it just didn't sink in at all. He's like really snotty to her initially. And when she's like, oh my God, you and fucking Gia, neither of you want to listen to me. And I should have seen that coming, but this sucks. And he sort of stops and is like, okay, I'm sorry. Please continue. And that's when she does the whole, like, you don't understand what Gia has been through. And you're focusing on a revenge. And that can't be the basis for everything. And he just, again, walks away. It's like very clearly of no interest. So then we go to chapter 19, Spies. And we get a intro here. First of all, there is a bird whose POV we're in. And the bird is giving us a view of the city from the sky. And it's sort of interesting because, like, you know, we've been in the POV of animals before, but it feels like he's leaning into that a bit more in this book. And I don't know if it's just because he finds it fun, if there's something, like, in particular he's trying to do with that. But here, it didn't feel entirely, like, necessary. And I'm hoping that there is something that comes up a little bit later with this same bird that will make it kind of click for me. Because otherwise, we just watch this old bird who is tired in his bones, and thus he is stealing fish from the market instead of, like, trying to hunt for it. Observe the human beings who are, like, loading boxes off of the floating bridge that's next to the wharves. And this is when we go to Notami's POV. And Notami has a lot of mixed feelings about his station as the sort of go-between. Notami, first Garinifin groom of the Pekyu, loyal hound of the Liuku, Duke of Zathan Gulf, and Deputy Minister of Native Affairs, stared at the fleet from the Big Island and wondered again whether he had made the right choice 8 years ago when he had betrayed Marshal Ginmazoti at the last minute and saved the life of Tanvanaki, thereby becoming part of the Liuku occupation of Rui and Dasu. Sure, he had plenty of wealth and women, but was that everything one wanted out of life? So I love this because later, after this, like, intro with his fucking titles and whatever, the woman who has been assigned to head this trip refers to him as Duke, and he couldn't exactly blow up at her. He was secretly relieved that she had not used the rest of his long string of titles. Had she done so, he would have had to grin and bear the humiliation, as there were 2 Liuku Thanes standing behind him to observe this exchange, and he couldn't afford to show any displeasure at being called a lapdog of the Liuku and a Garinifin shit shoveler. Even now, after 8 years, he couldn't tell if Tanvanaki had given him those titles because she genuinely thought they were complimentary, or because she was taunting him about his wavering loyalties. It's the second one. It's the second one, and that's just it for you. So I just want you to know 100% that bitch knew what she was doing, and she is no fool, and she is not paying you a fucking compliment. So anyway, Lady Ragi is the one that has been sent to flirt with him and get him to tell her some information. And he is just blissfully unaware that she's trying to play him as well as she can, and seems to think that, first of all, she's genuinely flirting with him later, which I cannot get over these dudes. Like, really? But no, it doesn't occur to him. And then when she extends an olive branch in so many words, because everything is done via the talk of a woodpecker going from tree to tree. So I feel like extending a branch works here a little bit too well. He is extended an opportunity to spy on the Liuku for the Dara. And he's really cautious about it, but he seems to think that's like her only function, is that she is here to double speak to him and try and get him back on their side. And I think that's absolutely not even really something that, like, if they can get that, sure. But I don't think that's their goal here. And the fact that he really flatters himself that he's the objective, it's just, he's so self-centered, you know, like, and the fact that he thinks that she's really flirting with him, and then we find out she's like married and the guy, her husband's right there. But what she does that I think is interesting. So apparently there's this like meeting that he always has whenever they bring goods from Dara. They make it seem like to the Liuku guards, they're going to have a long, boring talk about boring shit. And he is going to go into the ship and check for contraband. When in fact, what they're actually doing is having a lovely meal with him and giving him some information and treating him with some like goodies on the sly in a way that is an indulgence for him, especially because he gets to speak his own language. So he really seems to think that this is like a real cover, that they don't think it's surprising that he like goes in for his little contraband thing and then comes out fat and drunk. But or he just thinks that, because he says at one point that he's pretty confident Tom Vanaki actually does know about this, and that she figures it's not really worth him being denied something that seems just for fun and is harmless. But I don't know. So long story short, she does the thing where she's like, are you interested in coming back to us? And had also given him some messages about like, can the children of Timu come to see their grandmother? But all of this, he's like, no, they can't. I say that every time. Stop asking. Then we go to the POV of this other kid. And he was a Liuku who was rejected by all Garinafin. For whatever reason, they hate him. They don't like, every time he's around them, they just react really badly. And because of that, and the Garinafin just being fucking everything to the Liuku, he is seen as bad luck and was essentially ostracized by everyone. And he has felt alone his entire life. And one day he's next to this cove and sees the city ships. And it's just like, you know what? I want to see him. And he swims all the way out to them and is almost like completely exhausted to the point where he might drown by the time he actually gets there. Then he has to climb up the hull onto the deck, barefoot, barehanded. And he does it even though his nails are broken and bleeding and he's like crying in pain. He passes out on the deck, and when he wakes up, Tanvanaki is there and he thinks that she's in big trouble. But she's like, wait, are you saying you swam all the way out here? The water is freezing and you don't have any rope and you climbed up the side? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, yo, that is sick. What? And he's like, he says something about how he can't be near Garinafin. There's no place for me. Let me die. And she says, bad luck? No, okay, no, that's bullshit. Luck isn't even a thing. You can do things other Liuku can't do. And everybody has their part to play. I mean, you're not going to do the same shit as other animals that are also quite important. What you can do should be praised, not feared. And that's it. He has been so utterly rejected by everybody else, and this one person who is in charge is like, that is sick as hell. What? I want to learn. I'm sure I can't do it, but awesome. I don't need to. I have a Garinafin, but like, this is something I can use. And it's just undying loyalty from there. I can't even be mad at him, you know? So she uses him to spy. because he's very good at all of this. And what he's doing here is climbing up the side of the ship and listening at the porthole to the conversation between Norami and, what is her name again? Ragi. Lady Ragi. So he hears the offer for him to come back to their side. And we find out after Noda leaves that she senses he's there. And she even hears like a suppressed cough. And she goes specifically to stand by the window after Norami is gone and says some things very carefully, clearly enunciated, so that he will overhear. So what she says, so far she had simply been playing the role the Farsight Secretary and Empress Gia had agreed on, but the next step required her to go further, to carry out the instructions of the Empress to her in secret. Though she wasn't one of the Dyran Finns, the orphan girls who had chosen to stay by Gia's side instead of starting their own lives when they were grown, she viewed them as closer than sisters by blood. And like the Dyran Finns, she believed absolutely in Gia. She didn't understand why the Empress wanted her to do this, but she would do it without question. She looked outside the porthole. It's hard to know what's going on here in Uku Tasa. The Liuku run the conquered islands like a military camp. Even fishing boats heading out to sea are escorted. This whole thing is so put on, but this kid who's listening doesn't get that. So I don't know if the information he's being given is straight up wrong, or if Gia is trying to sabotage Thera. Because, forgive me, the timelines in this story get mixed up for me bad. So we know that time enough has passed for Thera's children to have grown to a certain age that they can talk and run around. Whether it is exactly coming up, the anniversary, and it's the exact days that they were told, or is she trying to, why would she try to sabotage Thera? Or is she trying to lure ships out by the storms, the Wall of Storms, purposefully for a reason? And how many people would go to greet them anyway? Why, would that even accomplish a goal like that? It's just, I don't know what she's setting up here, but it's very clearly something about this situation, whether it's the fact that it's true or not. Gia has a plan, and I am a little nervous about it. Because, again, I don't disagree with a lot of Gia's thesis. It's just that I think she has an idea of it being worth more sacrifice than I do, and also being more infallible than I believe it is. And, it's tough. It's I don't really know where I can draw lines, but if she's trying to sacrifice Thera, it's going to be really hard for me to not be pissed, because I really like Thera. And I don't know. We'll see. So, yeah, she drops all the information about the fact that the wall will open in the 5th month of the 11th year, while the treaty will end in the 1st month of the same year. We must do everything we can to resolve the Liuku threat during that 4-month window of opportunity. So maybe it's supposed to be that... So, okay, the wall will open in the 5th month, and the treaty will end in the 1st month. So is she trying to get the Liuku to think they are so guaranteed to get backup that they can agree to another truce until such time as they can break it and be guaranteed a win? Because Gia's attempting, we know, to keep the peace. She wants the treaty extended. And as of right now, there's really no feasible reason why the Liuku would agree to that. But 4 months isn't long. Is it that she's trying to keep it until Farah comes back with her people, and I guess the assumption that she would be making is that Farah and her people are going to come through with soldiers ready to like come down and fight out of the gate, which isn't how I was picturing Farah returning. But I may have just not really thought that through, because we know that part of the whole thing with Farah's like little settlement is that they're meant to be training and getting themselves ready to be fighters. And they just have to bide their time until the Wall of Storms opens again. But I wasn't really imagining them being completely up to snuff in terms of like fighting skill. And I guess I just didn't, like the Garinnafin as well. How are they getting them across? Because it's been pointed out that they don't have the city ships. So are they planning to be building those in the next year or two to get them across? Like, I have to assume the Garinnafin are part of the factor here. I don't know. The treaty will end in the first month of the same year. We must do everything we can to resolve the Liuku threat during that 4-month window. And finally, this kid drops off the hull and back through the water and is just like, she is going to be so psyched to hear this. Another Liuku fleet is coming. The Wall of Storms will be reopening. And I just feel a little bit bad for him because he loves her and means well and is super loyal for reasons that I really get. And he's giving her bad info. And I'm worried that he's going to be punished for that. I don't know how responsible she would hold him. Because Tapanaki really does seem to try to be fair in her weird way. I like to think she wouldn't hold him responsible because she would know he had just been tricked. And like, how is he supposed to know? He's not here to think. He's here to convey information. But I just still worry because the Liuku can be a little unpredictable. So anyway, yeah, that's the end of the second of the 2 chapters. So this was a really good section though. And, Gia, man, I get it. I really get her. But she seems so angry. And it makes me worry that she's like gonna just spill so much blood and it's not gonna be worth anything. Based on like what she was trying to put in place in the last book, and the Liuku show up and completely tear it to shit. But it would have worked. Maybe, but she also was just killing innocent people, like having them slaughtered to cover her tracks and stuff. It is so hard for me to like be okay with that. I just don't know what to do. I mean, we know that Kuni did shady shit, but that kind of particular coldness, I'm sure it happened. I'm not trying to say he's like never, but I don't remember him personally like being at the helm of it. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, because God knows it's been a minute since I read like the first book that deals mostly with his takeover. So I guess somebody can come at me with that, but I just I have things to say in the next section because I don't have time today, but I have some things I want to explore on this. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again very much to Kyle for commissioning this. Appreciate you. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.